Bartholomew Town.
Welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Remember, you can find every episode of the podcast wherever you listen. Maybe that's Spotify or Apple. And now on YouTube, ripodcast.com, and from Boston to New Haven on WPRO Radio. All right, one of the topics that we've spent kind of a lot of time on in different capacities over the last several years is multimodality in transit, and just thinking about things like 15-minute cities, thinking about things like how can we transform Rhode Island, a state that is, we'll put it this way, devoid of significant public transit options, whether you're talking even actually devoid of significant bike lanes and even challenges for pedestrians. How can we imagine our state, which is a city state in and around Providence, as we move towards the future? And one way to do that is to be less car-centric. No doubt we've had a major crisis here in this state, a major thoroughfare, the Washington Bridge, which connects Providence to the East Bay of Rhode Island, abruptly closed. We're not going to get into the travel of that story in detail, but it has proven how difficult it is when you have any significant delay or any significant change to the transit pattern that is car-centric here in Providence. And I think it's given people an opportunity to start to think outside of the box. And that's exactly what our guests have done, and have done so well, elevating this discussion on their podcast, The War on Cars. In sum, it's a podcast that delivers news and commentary on the latest developments in the worldwide fight to undo a century's worth of damage wrought by the automobile. They approach the topic from all angles, from politics to pop culture. 2 episodes a week, plus a bonus episode on Patreon. We're joined by Doug Gordon and Sarah Goodyear, hosts of the podcast, who will also be here for a live podcast in Providence coming up on December 2nd at the Uptown Theater in Providence. I will be a part of that as well. So if you're looking to use the bathroom or get some concessions, that may be your moment. Sarah, Doug, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
All right, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's get into, from a topical standpoint, from each of you. When did you start to pay attention to this topic with enough significance that it became really a vocation for you?
So I started reporting on these issues back in 2006. I started with Streets Blog as a freelancer, and just writing about, at that time, Mayor Bloomberg's plan in New York City to make New York more climate resilient, and transportation was a big part of that. And then that was a period in the aughts and 2010s when there was a real interest in how do we revitalize cities? How do we bring cities back from the decline that they'd been in the late 20th century? And a big part of that was active transportation and decentering the car and bringing people onto the streets and into community with each other. And so I just did a lot of reporting about that. I grew up in New York City, so I had that as part of my birthright, but I really wanted to see other people have that, and more people in the United States to have that option to live like that. And I started to be kind of offended by the idea that other people didn't have that ability to just be out in their community on foot or on bicycle and being with their neighbors and using public transit. So yeah, I think it kind of, for me, I started out from a journalistic perspective, and then it has, over the years, morphed into maybe more of an advocacy role, because it's something I just feel so passionately about.
Doug, similar question. Your entry point is?
Yeah, I grew up in Andover, Massachusetts, so north of Boston, on a cul-de-sac with no sidewalks off of a very busy road, Route 28. And biking and walking was more or less impossible. And I was driven to school and drove to school when I got my driver's license. And I ended up living in Atlanta briefly after college. And that is just, sort of LA without the beach. You have to drive everywhere. And I really just didn't like that part of living in Atlanta. And so as soon as I could, I moved to New York City, where I had a lot of friends and family. And as soon as I arrived there, I just felt instantly at ease, being able to use the subway. And a little while later, it was sort of the same period that Sarah was talking about. The DOT under Jeanette Sadiq-Khan was adding bike lanes and all kinds of stuff to the city. So I started paying attention to that a lot more. My background is in television production, so I was sort of approaching this issue from sort of like a documentary-based mindset of like, how does this get made? How does this happen? And that was sort of my entry point into stuff.
It's interesting you each have that New York experience, as do I. Spent a decade in the city, and I think it was such a profound mental shift, if nothing else, to arrive in New York and realize I'm going to sell my car. Number one, this is convenient, so I can pay my rent. I was a musician, so I was like, this is great. But more than anything, just the ease of access. And it's so important to note that though New York is certainly not the poster child for multimodality, a lot of important things have happened. You mentioned Bloomberg all the way through de Blasio. There were major changes in the expansion of Vision Zero and in the expansion of bike lanes, City Bike. Things like this all formed sort of a system, if you will, outside of the system, merged with pedestrians and merged with obviously the subway and buses. So New York is definitely, in our regional sense, a different vibe than, as you said, Doug, Andover, Massachusetts. And it becomes simpler to think about a car-free world when you see what's possible in New York. So how do you take that sort of mentality and introduce it to places? Let's even stay here in Providence, where we've got a bus system, RIPTA, Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, that is hardly usable. In fact, they've just made significant cuts to it. And most people couldn't imagine life without a car. So what's the starting point for somebody who lives in a place like Andover or Rhode Island that it's not New York, but you should still think about moving past the car?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of New England small towns and a city like Providence have excellent bones. There's small streetscapes. Even those small towns like the one I grew up in have a central downtown with town hall right in the middle and a junior high school right off the main street. And so I think you kind of have to start where it's possible. I mean, obviously in the outer edges of those towns, you're going to need a car to get around and do the things you want. But it is possible. E-bikes make a big difference in places like that, where maybe transit service is not so expansive or all that useful, but things are not quite so far away that you couldn't use an e-bike with a little assist. I also think it comes down to electing the right people. That's usually how it sort of goes in every place, big or small. With the service cuts to transit that many cities, including Providence, are facing, those cuts wouldn't happen if the right elected officials were in place making different decisions. So I think getting involved in local politics, running for office yourself, or just talking to your neighbors about why this is important and why this is a political conversation is a great place to start, no matter where you live.
Yeah, here in Rhode Island, Governor Dan McKee, trying to protect his fiscal mindset, says, well, we're making the cuts because that's the budget that we're working with. Of course, budgets are a reflection of priorities of any administrator, not just administration, even your own life. So with that in mind, Sarah, what have you seen in your journalistic work that have been examples of good elected official behavior, at least in terms of advancing the ball when it comes to multimodality and potentially even thinking beyond the car? Because we haven't really seen that here in Rhode Island, that's for sure.
Bartholomew Town.
You've been hearing me talk a lot about Navigant Credit Union, and for good reason. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. You can learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Newport Film. Check out newportfilm.com for all the latest screening details. Are you ready to take the next step in your career? At URI Online, we offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development, our online programs provide the flexibility you need with the high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look to New York, but I hate to always point to New York because of its exceptional nature or how different it is. But, I went out on a bike ride in Emeryville, California, which is an industrial city in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And the mayor there at the time, a guy named John Bauters, was sort of known as the bike mayor of America because he, in building Emeryville, which like a lot of cities in America is being kind of rebuilt from industrial roots, not a lot of infrastructure, some new development going on, new buildings going in. And instead of steering that new development toward being more car-centric, he really fought hard to create a streetscape where people can ride bikes, where people can take transit, and, saw this kind of fresh canvas of what are we doing with this new development, and said, let's make it about people and not about cars. And so in a landscape that, not unlike certain parts of Rhode Island, has a really heavy industrial history and some, rail infrastructure and highway infrastructure kind of plowing through it and fragmenting the community, the mayor in Emeryville really leaned into reconnecting that community and kind of repairing that community through the streetscape and investing in what the experience for human beings on the street is. And, it was a tough political fight. A lot of these things are, but he had a really strong vision for what he wanted to do. And as a result, that city, the very small city, is now, a place where people do bike and walk and use transit. And, that's the kind of leadership that Doug was talking about. I think, he's not in office yet, but I also want to point to the campaign of Zohran Mamdani in New York. The thing that I really love about what he did with his campaign was that he elevated bus riders and the bus itself, the exact thing that you're talking about being torn down in Rhode Island. And, I think there's so much stigma put on the bus. And that's because we don't really have respect for the people who are riding the bus traditionally in the United States of America. And so I think it's a really important fight to say that the people who use the bus deserve the same dignity and respect and convenience that people in cars deserve, because they're equally members of our society and part of the electorate. And I think that sort of elevating bus riders as a political constituency is something that Mamdani has done that is pretty important. And I think it could end up having a lot of reverberations. But I think, it reveals that we just need to look at all users as equally important and not privilege car users over other people, because we're all just people and we all have the same rights in the society.
Well said. I couldn't agree more with that statement. And I think that when we look to New York right now, what's interesting is that Mamdani running on the three, we'll call them major issues, the sort of frontline issues, food insecurity, housing, and transit. And there's a lot of intersectionality there, right? We think about transit deserts, food deserts, housing costs. A lot of times those things overlap, but they don't always as well. And I think that one thing about Mamdani's campaign is that it shows that it's gotten people who maybe they're above average housing secure, maybe they're above average food secure. Maybe they're now even just a little bit more curious about the bus system because they saw a video of, Mamdani on the M54 that goes 4.2 miles an hour. And they're like, well, that sucks. And it sucks if you have to do that every day. And we have to be able to do that better. So I also wonder, kind of with that in mind, I saw a clip of the two of you on, I don't remember which market it was, but some local news broadcast like type of thing, very, we'll call it mainstream. And the anchor was like, well, wait a minute, you want people to live without their cars? Like, I've literally either never heard of this, or I'm going to feign that this is some kind of like radical idea that is completely insane. And now you have to respond to a general audience that has been set up with this idea that you're coming in with this, I don't know, far left agenda to take away people's cars. That's the criticism Mamdani has gotten. I mean, on the grocery stores, I mean, it's all nonsense. It's all obviously junk science or garbage, or Ben Shapiro comes on and screams about something. It's stupidity at its highest peak. But how do you respond to that? Because you did so in that clip in a way that was very, using that same approach you took before, very humanizing. How do you do that?
I wish I remembered exactly what I said on that clip, but usually what we say is it's not an absolutist agenda or argument. Cars are a tool, just like any other. And just like you would use, I compare mobility to a Swiss Army knife, and you would use the knife if you have to whittle a stick, and the corkscrew if you got to open a bottle. And, that's how we should treat cars. They're a great tool for the weekend road trip, or when you have to haul something really big, or you've got a lot of passengers or whatever. But if you're just getting a gallon of milk at the store and the store is less than a mile away, it's kind of silly to take a Ford F-150 there, or even, a Honda Civic, to be honest. And I think part of what we're trying to do with the podcast and with the book is to get people to question these assumptions that you just have to default to driving for everything. I sort of liken our movement to like a meatless Monday sort of movement. We're not asking people to quit cars cold turkey. What we are asking them to do is say, where could I, if I'm able-bodied, if the weather's good, if the conditions are right, if I have a safe place to walk or bike, where could I start replacing 1 or 2 trips to save some money, to save some aggravation? Because driving stinks. Most of the driving that people do in their daily lives is not the driving that is sold to them in car commercials. It's being stuck in traffic on your way to just go get food, on your way to go to school. And it's kind of absurd when you think about it. I mean, I think, getting rid of your car might sound really absurd to people, but this idea that you need a car for everything, I think that's more absurd in many ways. And that's what we're trying to get people to do, is just start to question and see this problem for what it is.
Yeah. And I also would add that, like, seeing the car as the tool that serves you, and not our cities and towns and suburbs as being the tools that the car uses to get what it wants. Why are we doing everything to serve this master, the car, right? Like, this is supposed to be for us, and yet we end up financially burdened and tied to loans and insurance and fuel prices and all of that. And sometimes I think you just need to break out and say, like, wait a second, what am I paying for here? Who am I paying it to? And I think that the economic argument is something that can resonate with people when their life costs are going up so much, right, that, and car costs are a huge part of that. What would it be like if I didn't have to spend that much money on a car, or, didn't have to have 2 cars in my family? I could just get by with 1.
Absolutely. There's also the component of the roadway itself, right? Which, from a design standpoint, I mean, we're not even talking, Robert Moses or anything like that, talking here in Rhode Island. It's, it's kind of absurd the way it's laid out. And there's a lot of history behind why 95 runs the way it does through the city, with all kinds of winding curves and so on and so forth. But something my partner and I were talking about recently is the idea of the road as a shared communal space. And you get a lot of, I hate to say it, but a lot of people are amateurs on the roadway, and it's a dangerous environment. It's a moment where there's a lot of disrespect, and that's something to consider as well. You're literally talking about sometimes people who either don't care or care very little about anybody else, and now they're driving virtually a weapon, operating a weapon in your shared space. And this is not something that we often reflect upon, and we probably should more. And it's a good argument for why we should be thinking transit-wise differently at minimum?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about we have a chapter in the book called Cars Ruin Society. And we talk about the idea that when you're in a car, everyone is your adversary, right? Everyone is in your way. Whereas if you're on a bicycle or walking or on transit, the other people around you are human beings that you might be interested in or have some kind of communion with. And, I think about Rhode Island being so small in terms of its landmass. When you were talking, I was just thinking, wow, that's true, that there's not much space in Rhode Island in a lot of ways. And so much of it is paved over and given to cars. What would it be like if that precious space, that precious resource that you have relatively little of, were used differently?
Life After Cars is the book. It's out now, and I have a copy of it. It's awesome. Freeing ourselves from the tyranny of the automobile. Hey, you guys are going on tour. What's that going to be like? I mean, we're going to be at the Uptown Theater on December 2nd, but what's it like being on tour? Are there going to be like buses and like no brown M&Ms in the bowl and all that when you get there, or what's this like?
We have tour T-shirts. We got the whole thing, and we do have at least one or two people who've seen us in multiple cities. So I guess we have a groupie or two groupies.
I like this.
It's been great because, every city is reckoning with the car, and every city has people who are questioning these things, and every city is installing bike lanes and going through all the growing pains that we're seeing with that. So it's exciting to see what's out there, and you can learn so much being in cities of every size. It's great.
What's the sort of in wrapping here, what's the next step for you in terms of the advocacy piece and the journalism piece here? I mean, obviously the book's out, you're doing the podcast, you're on tour. How do you take this to Washington, and how do we start to have a national conversation about integrating transit systems the way that we did in the Eisenhower interstate system, where we have cohesiveness on light rail, whatever you want to call it, full rail? How do we get this to become a national conversation that is ultimately, hopefully, apolitical?
Well, I think first we have to right the ship of democracy. Obviously that's the big issue right now.
Right.
But I think sort of like we've been kind of, you were saying basically, is we have to see that these issues fold into everything. Affordability was such a huge issue in the presidential campaign, and it remains so right now. And we need to tie things like housing costs and why it's more expensive to build housing if you have to include parking, if you're building farther out, so that people have to have this depreciating asset that they have to fuel up. Think about the ways in which fuel prices influence elections. So I think we need to really start to elect those people who will have those conversations and tie them to all of our other issues. We have baby boomers who are all aging out of driving. What's going to happen to all of them when they have these big suburban homes and they can't go anywhere because they've lost their reflexes or, other things that allow them to drive? So I think we just have to keep having these conversations. And it really, like I said, comes down to electing the right people who prioritize this and have some experience with it and understand why it's important.
And Sarah?
Yeah, and I think I just want to add that I think there's a real generational shift happening. And one of the most exciting aspects of being out on the road in the cities that we've been in has been, including, we were just in a really small city, Nanaimo in British Columbia, that, is not a poster child for any kind of transit or anything like that. But the room was packed with young people. And young people want something different. And a lot of the people who are showing up for our shows are younger, and they do have a different perspective. And I think that the political establishment ignores that at its peril.
Couldn't agree more. Sarah Goodyear, Doug Gordon, December 2nd at the Uptown Theater. By the way, we've got some Brooklyn listeners as well. You're at the Bell House. Is that October 25th?
That already happened. Yeah, we did that one already.
Yeah. Oh, Mike. So, yes, we are recording this on Tuesday, November 11th, and I did just announce an upcoming event on Tuesday, October 28th in Brooklyn. So if you are in possession, speaking of multimodal, if you've got a time machine at your disposal,
if you have a time machine, you're set. Yeah.
Great prep
just
over
make
here.
Just make it a bicycle, not a DeLorean at 88 miles an hour. Yeah.
Just come to Providence, December 2nd. Walk around. There's tickets available still. It's a beautiful theater, just renovated, and it's going to be a great night. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah, we're excited.
The advocacy is deeply appreciated. I think we're going to see a shift here. I don't think Mamdani is an anomaly. I think we're going to start to see a shift in this conversation, and you're at the front lines of it, and it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Bartholomew Town is brought to you by Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, the University of Rhode Island Online, and Newport Film.